After his marriage ended, David thought he'd forgotten how to love. Then Elena crossed the room and reminded him what courage looked like. David stared at the coffee shop sign outside his car window. Creative writing for life changes, it said in bright yellow letters. He checked his phone again. 5 minutes late already. Part of him wanted to drive away and tell his therapist he went, but Dr. Martinez would know he was lying. She always did. He grabbed his notebook from the passenger seat and walked inside. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries hit him first. Then he saw them, about 12 people sitting in a circle near the back corner. They all looked so comfortable, like they belonged there. David felt like an outsider. He always did these days. "You must be David," said a warm voice behind him. He turned around and saw a woman with paint-stained fingers holding 2 cups of coffee. "I'm Elena. I saved you a seat and got you coffee." "Black, right? You look like a black coffee person." She was right. But how did she know? Elena had this way of moving that caught his attention. Not rushed, not slow. Just present, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it. She wore a simple green sweater that had tiny holes near the sleeves. "Thanks," David said, taking the coffee. It was perfect temperature. Not too hot, not too cold. They sat down in the circle. The instructor, an older man with kind eyes, asked everyone to share why they came to the class. David's stomach tightened. He hated talking about himself to strangers. When his turn came, he kept it simple. "My therapist thinks writing might help me process some changes in my life." Elena went next. "I'm here because I want to tell better stories to my daughter, and maybe understand my own story better too." Something about the way she said it made David look at her again. There was honesty there. No pretending everything was fine. The class spent an hour writing about a moment that changed them. David wrote about the day his ex-wife asked for a divorce. Not the dramatic parts. Just the small detail he remembered most. How quiet the house felt afterward. When they shared their writing, Elena read about teaching her 8-year-old daughter to ride a bike. But it wasn't really about the bike. It was about letting go and trusting someone you love to find their own balance. After class, people started leaving. David packed his notebook slowly. He didn't want to go home to his empty apartment. "Want to grab dinner?" Elena asked. "There's a place next door that makes amazing soup." David almost said no. He'd gotten used to eating alone. But something made him nod. Yes. The restaurant was small and busy. They found a table by the window. Elena ordered tomato soup and grilled cheese. David got the same thing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd ordered something just because it sounded good. "So what kind of changes?" Elena asked, stirring her soup. "Divorce," David said. Then he felt like he should explain more. "After 18 years. She said we'd grown apart. I didn't even realize it was happening." Elena nodded. "Mine too. 3 years ago, but it was more like an explosion than growing apart." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. David wasn't used to comfortable silence with new people. Usually he felt pressure to fill every gap in conversation. "What do you do when you're not writing?" Elena asked. "I'm an architect. I design buildings. Mostly offices and schools. Nothing too exciting." David realized how boring that sounded. "What about you?" "I teach pottery classes on weekends. During the week I work at an art supply store, and I'm always making something with my hands. Painting, sculpting, fixing broken things." The way she said fixing broken things made David wonder what she was really talking about. They talked until the restaurant started putting chairs on tables. Elena told him about her daughter Maya, who loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. David shared stories about his teenage son Alex, who lived with his ex-wife but visited every other weekend. "It's hard," Elena said, "figuring out how to be yourself again after being part of something for so long." David felt something loosen in his chest. Someone understood. Walking to their cars, Elena stopped at an old blue Honda with a dent in the passenger door. "This is me," she said. David's car was 3 spaces down. A gray sedan that looked like every other gray sedan in the parking lot. "Same time next week?" Elena asked. "Yeah," David said. "I'll be there." Driving home, David noticed things he usually missed. The way the streetlights made patterns on the road. A couple walking their dog, laughing about something. A woman in her kitchen window washing dishes and dancing to music he couldn't hear. At home, his apartment felt different. Not empty exactly, just quiet in a peaceful way instead of a lonely way. He made tea and sat in his reading chair. For the first time in months, he felt curious about tomorrow. About next week? About what Elena might write in the next class. David picked up his notebook and started writing. Not because his therapist said he should, just because he wanted to remember this feeling. The feeling of meeting someone who made the world seem a little more interesting. He wrote about Elena's paint-stained fingers and how she knew he drank black coffee. About the way she listened when people shared their stories. About feeling less alone in a room full of strangers. When he finished writing, David looked at his phone. It was past midnight. He'd been writing for 2 hours and hadn't noticed. Tomorrow he would go to work and draw buildings. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he was thinking about possibilities instead of problems. Maybe his therapist was right about this writing thing after all. 3 months had passed since that first writing class. David found himself looking forward to Wednesdays more than any other day of the week. Not just for the class anymore, but for the long talks with Elena afterward. They'd moved from the soup place to her favorite coffee shop, then to walks around the neighborhood, and finally to cooking dinner together. Tonight was different. Elena had invited him to her apartment for the first time. Her place was exactly what he'd imagined. Art everywhere. Canvases leaning against walls, half-finished sculptures on tables, and books stacked in towers that somehow looked organized. The smell of paint and something that might have been incense filled the air. "Maya's at her dad's for the weekend," Elena said, stirring something on the stove. "I thought we could actually have a conversation without interruption for once." David smiled. Maya was wonderful, but 8-year-olds didn't believe in quiet moments. Every time they'd tried to talk at the park while Maya played, she'd run over with urgent news about a bug she'd found or a game she'd invented. They ate pasta with homemade sauce at her small kitchen table. Elena had lit candles, but David could tell she was nervous about it. She kept apologizing for the candles, then apologizing for apologizing. "I'm out of practice," she admitted, twirling pasta around her fork. "Dating, being alone with someone." "All of it, me too," David said. "I keep waiting for you to realize I'm boring." Elena laughed. "Boring? You told me last week about the time you accidentally designed a building upside down and didn't notice for 3 days. That's not boring. That's human." After dinner, they moved to her couch. It was old and comfortable, covered with a throw blanket that looked handmade. Elena tucked her feet under her and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. What was the hardest part about your divorce? Not the paperwork or the lawyers." The real hard part, David thought for a moment. No one had asked him that before. Everyone wanted to know who was at fault or if he was okay, but no one asked about the actual difficulty of it. "Realizing I'd been invisible," he said finally, not just to her but to myself. "I spent so many years being what I thought a husband should be that I forgot who I actually was." Elena nodded slowly. "For me, it was the opposite. I became too visible. Everything I did was wrong. Too messy, too loud, too much. I started to believe I was too much for anyone." They sat quietly for a while. David could hear rain starting outside. Elena's apartment felt like a safe bubble away from everything else. "I don't think you're too much," David said. "I don't think you're invisible." Elena replied. Something shifted in the air between them. Not dramatic, just a small change, like a door opening somewhere. Elena stood up and walked to the window. She pulled the curtain back and watched the rain for a moment. When she turned around, David saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Not nervousness this time. Decision. She walked toward him slowly, maintaining eye contact the whole time. When she reached the couch, she didn't sit down. Instead, she began unbuttoning her shirt. "Elena," David started to say. "I want you to see me," she said quietly. "Really see me. I've spent 3 years hiding from everyone, including myself. But I don't want to hide from you." She let her shirt fall to the floor, then the rest of her clothes followed. David had seen beautiful women before, but this wasn't about beauty. This was about trust, about Elena choosing to be completely vulnerable with him. She moved toward the couch, toward him, with a grace that took his breath away. When she reached him, she climbed onto the couch and into his arms. Then she smiled. It wasn't a seductive smile or a playful one. It was pure joy. The smile of someone who had been carrying fear for a long time and had finally chosen to set it down. David felt something break open inside his chest. Not break apart, but break open. like spring breaking through winter. This was what had been missing from his marriage. Not passion or attraction, though those had faded too. It was this willingness to be completely known by another person. "You're beautiful," he whispered. But he wasn't talking about her body. He was talking about her courage. Elena leaned into him and David wrapped his arms around her. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other. Rain continued outside. Candles flickered on the table. The world kept spinning, but in that moment everything felt perfectly still. "I was so scared," Elena said against his shoulder. "Of what?" "That you'd see all of me and decide it was too much. That you'd leave like everyone else." David pulled back so he could look at her face. "Elena, look at me." She met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "And you're not too much. You're exactly enough." Later they talked until dawn about fears and hopes and dreams they'd never shared with anyone, about what it meant to love someone without losing yourself, about the difference between being naked and being seen. When the sun came up, David realized something had fundamentally changed, not just between them, but inside him. For the first time in years, he felt fully alive, fully present, fully himself. Elena fell asleep in his arms as morning light filled the room. David stayed awake watching her breathe, wondering how he'd gotten so lucky to find someone willing to be real with him. He thought about that smile again, the one she'd given him when she'd chosen trust over fear. He wanted to spend the rest of his life earning that smile, protecting the courage it represented. Outside, the rain had stopped and the world was waking up. But inside Elena's apartment, two people had found something they'd both thought was lost forever. The ability to be completely themselves with another person. 6 months into their relationship, David learned that love wasn't just about the two people in it. It was about everyone those two people brought with them. Maya stood in Elena's kitchen, arms crossed, staring at David like he was an unwelcome stranger. Which, from her perspective, he probably was. "Why is he here again?" Maya asked Elena, not bothering to lower her voice. David was making pancakes. He'd offered because Elena had been up late finishing a pottery order, but now he wondered if he'd overstepped. In his own house, making breakfast was normal. Here he was apparently invading Maya's territory. "Because I invited him," Elena said gently, "and because he makes really good pancakes." Maya remained unimpressed. "My dad makes better pancakes." David felt the familiar sting that came whenever Maya mentioned her father. Not jealousy exactly, but something close to it. How do you compete with someone's real dad when you're just the guy their mom likes? Elena caught his eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile. They'd talked about this. Maya had been through enough changes. They couldn't expect her to adjust overnight. "I bet your dad does make great pancakes," David said, flipping one in the pan. "Want to help me with these? I could use an expert opinion." Maya hesitated, then climbed onto a chair next to the stove. "You're doing it wrong," she announced. "The bubbles need to be bigger before you flip." David waited for bigger bubbles. "Like that?" "Better," Maya said grudgingly. Small victories, David thought. The bigger challenges came later. Elena's financial situation was more complicated than David had realized. Her art brought in some money, but not reliably. The pottery classes helped, but barely covered her rent. David wanted to help, but every time he offered, Elena got defensive. "I've been taking care of myself and Maya for 3 years," she said during one particularly tense conversation. "I don't need someone to rescue me." "That's not what I'm trying to do," David replied. "I just want to help." "Why?" "Because you think I can't handle it." David realized he was walking through a minefield he didn't understand. Elena's independence wasn't just preference. It was survival. Her ex-husband had controlled everything. The money, the decisions, even what Elena was allowed to want. She'd fought hard to build a life where no one could take her choices away. But David's own life wasn't simple either. His architecture firm was struggling. 3 big clients had canceled projects, and David was working longer hours for less pay. His ex-wife had noticed his stress during one of Alex's weekend visits and made it clear she thought David was falling apart. "Maybe Alex should stay with me more until you get your life sorted out," she'd suggested, in that tone that sounded helpful but felt like a threat. David loved his son, but being a part-time father was harder than he'd expected. Alex was 15 now, more interested in his phone than talking to his dad. When David tried to share parts of his new life, like mentioning Elena or the writing class, Alex just shrugged. The first real crisis came on a Tuesday evening. David was at Elena's. helping Maya with homework while Elena finished a sculpture in her studio corner. Maya was working on a math problem, getting frustrated with fractions. "I don't get it," Maya said, erasing for the fourth time. "It's okay," David said. "Let's try a different way." He was explaining equivalent fractions using pizza slices when Maya suddenly doubled over, crying out in pain. "My stomach," she gasped. Elena rushed over, paint still wet on her hands. Maya's face was pale and she was breathing in short, sharp bursts. "We need to go to the hospital," Elena said, already reaching for her keys. But Elena's car wouldn't start. It made a clicking sound and died. Elena tried again, panic rising in her voice. "Take my car," David said, tossing her his keys. "I can't," Elena said. "I'm not on your insurance." "What if something happens?" "Elena, she needs medical attention now." "Take the car." In the end, David drove while Elena sat in the back with Maya. At the hospital, they discovered Maya's appendix needed to come out immediately. The next few hours were a blur of waiting rooms and doctors and forms Elena couldn't fill out fast enough. Maya kept asking for her mom and Elena kept stroking her hair, whispering that everything would be okay. David felt useless. He wasn't family. He couldn't make decisions or sign papers or even hold Maya's hand without feeling like he was intruding on something private. But when Maya came out of surgery, still groggy from anesthesia, she looked around the room and her eyes found David. "Did you wait for me?" she asked, her voice small and sleepy. "Of course I did," David said. Maya smiled, the first real smile she'd ever given him. "Good, I was worried you'd leave." The words hit David harder than he expected. Maya hadn't just been resistant to him joining their family. She'd been protecting herself from caring about someone who might disappear. Later, after Maya was settled in her hospital bed and Elena had finally relaxed enough to eat something, she and David sat in the quiet hallway. "Thank you," Elena said, "for everything today. For staying. Where else would I go?" Elena leaned against his shoulder. "I keep waiting for this to be too much for you. Single mom, financial stress, complicated kid, drama with exes. Most people would run." David thought about that. 6 months ago, he probably would have run. He'd spent so many years avoiding complications, choosing the safe path, the predictable path. But sitting here in this hospital, watching Elena be strong for her daughter, he realized he didn't want the easy path anymore. "I'm not most people," he said, "and this isn't too much. It's just life. Real life." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Maya likes you now." "Think so?" "She asked if you were going to be her stepdad." I told her we hadn't talked about that yet. David's heart did something complicated in his chest. "What did she say?" Elena smiled. "She said that would be okay with her as long as you keep making pancakes." David laughed. "I think I can handle that." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the hospital around them. David realized something had shifted again. Not just between him and Elena this time, but between him and Maya, between him and the whole complicated, messy, beautiful reality of loving people who came with histories and fears and needs he couldn't always meet. For the first time since his divorce, David felt like he belonged somewhere. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Because Elena and Maya had seen him handle a crisis and decided he was worth keeping around. Maya recovered quickly, the way kids do. But something had changed permanently. She started including David in her conversations about school and friends. She asked his opinion on things that mattered to her. She stopped referring to him as Elena's friend and started just calling him David. It wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days when Maya missed her father, or when Elena felt overwhelmed by trying to balance work and motherhood and a new relationship. David still felt like he was learning a new language sometimes, the language of being part of a family that wasn't born but chosen. But they were building something together, something that felt solid and honest and worth the complications it brought. For the first time in his adult life, David understood the difference between a relationship that worked and one that mattered. 1 year into their relationship, David learned that love wasn't just about good days. It was about whether you could survive the bad ones together. The trouble started with a phone call on a Monday morning. David was in his office reviewing building plans when his business partner called with news that made his stomach drop. "The Henderson project is gone," Tom said without any warm-up. "They're pulling out completely." Something about budget cuts. David stared at the plans spread across his desk. The Henderson project was their biggest contract. The one that was supposed to carry the firm through the next 2 years. What about the Morrison building? David asked, though he could tell from Tom's silence that he already knew the answer. They want to put everything on hold. Maybe revisit next spring. David did quick math in his head. Without those 2 projects, they had maybe 3 months before they'd have to start laying people off. Maybe 4 months before they'd have to close completely. He'd built this firm from nothing after his divorce. It was more than just work to him. It was proof that he could create something meaningful on his own. That evening, David sat in Elena's kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Elena was cleaning brushes at the sink, stealing worried glances at him. "You want to talk about it?" she asked finally. David told her everything. The canceled contracts, the financial mess, the possibility that he might lose his business. Elena listened without trying to fix anything, which was exactly what he needed. "I'm scared," David admitted. "This firm is all I have left from my old life that actually worked." Elena dried her hands and sat across from him. "It's not all you have." Before David could ask what she meant, her phone rang. Elena looked at the caller ID and frowned. "I have to take this," she said, stepping into the next room. David could hear parts of the conversation. Something about an opportunity. Something about New Mexico. Something about 6 months. When Elena came back, she looked excited and terrified at the same time. "That was the Southwestern Arts Council," she said. "They want to offer me a residency. In Santa Fe. It's a huge opportunity, David. The kind of thing that could change everything for my career." David felt something cold settle in his chest. "How long?"
6 months.
"Maybe longer if it goes well. 6 months." Right when David's world was falling apart, Elena had a chance to build something incredible for herself. He should have been happy for her. He wanted to be happy for her. But all he could think about was being alone again. "That's amazing," he said, and he almost meant it. The next few weeks brought more bad news. David's ex-wife found out about his business troubles and immediately called her lawyer. She wanted to revisit their custody agreement. "Alex needs stability," she told David during a tense phone call. "Maybe it's better if he stays with me full-time until you get your life figured out." The words hit David like a punch. He'd already lost his marriage, his house, his sense of who he was supposed to be. Now he might lose his business and his time with his son, too. Elena was dealing with her own complications. Maya's father had suddenly reappeared after 2 years of almost no contact. He wanted to be part of Maya's life again, he claimed. He'd gotten his life together, found a steady job, even started going to therapy. "I don't trust him," Elena told David one night as they walked around her neighborhood. "But Maya has been asking about him. She deserves to know her father if he's really changed." David understood the impossible position Elena was in, but he also understood that if Maya's father came back permanently, David's role in Maya's life would change completely, maybe disappear altogether. The stress was affecting everything. David found himself snapping at Elena over small things. Elena withdrew into her art, spending long hours in her studio. They were living in the same space but felt miles apart. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. David had spent the day meeting with lawyers and accountants, trying to figure out how to save his firm. Elena had been dealing with Maya's emotional confusion about her father's return. They were both exhausted and raw. David was trying to help Maya with homework, but she was distracted and kept making the same mistakes over and over. "Maya, focus," David said, his patience wearing thin. "We've gone over this 3 times. You're not my real dad," Maya shot back. "You can't tell me what to do." The words shouldn't have hurt as much as they did. Maya was 9 years old and confused about why all the adults in her life kept changing the rules. But David felt every word like a blade. Elena looked up from her sketchbook. Maya apologized to David. "Why?" "It's true. He's just your boyfriend. My real dad is coming to see me this weekend." David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." He walked outside and sat on Elena's front steps. The night was cold and he hadn't grabbed a jacket. But the cold felt appropriate somehow. Everything in his life was falling apart and he didn't know how to stop it. Elena came outside a few minutes later and sat beside him. "She didn't mean it," Elena said softly. "Yes, she did. And she's right. I'm not her father. I'm not your husband. I'm just someone who's here right now." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Is that really how you see yourself?" David looked at her. Even in the dim light from the street lamp, he could see the hurt in her eyes. I don't know anymore. I don't know what I am to you and Maya. I don't know if my business is going to survive. I don't know if I'm going to lose Alex. I feel like I'm failing at everything. So what are you saying? David realized they'd reached a crossroads. He could retreat back into the safe, predictable loneliness he'd known before meeting Elena, or he could stay and fight for something that felt uncertain and fragile. I'm saying I'm scared, he said finally. I'm scared that you'll take the residency and realize you don't need me. I'm scared that Maya's father will come back and there won't be room for me anymore. I'm scared that I'm going to lose everything that matters to me. Elena took his hand. It was cold, but her touch was warm. I'm scared too. I'm scared that if I don't take this opportunity, I'll regret it forever. But I'm also scared that if I do take it, you won't be here when I get back. They sat in silence, holding hands on the cold steps. David realized this was the moment that would define everything between them. Not the good moments when everything was easy. This moment when everything was hard and they had to choose whether to face it together or apart. Maya's going through a lot right now, Elena said. Her father being back is confusing for her. She's testing boundaries with everyone, not just you. David nodded. I know. I shouldn't have taken it personally. And the residency, Elena continued. I want to take it. But I also want you in my life. I need to figure out if I can have both. David looked at her. What if we can't figure it out? What if this is too much? Elena squeezed his hand. Then at least we'll know we tried. But I don't want to give up without trying. David felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. There was also determination. Love wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be worth it. Okay, he said. Let's try. They went back inside to find Maya waiting for them, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said to David. I was mean. I don't want you to leave. David knelt down to her level. I'm not leaving, Maya. We're all figuring this out together, okay? But we're going to figure it out as a family. It was the first time David had used that word about the three of them. Family. It felt scary and right at the same time. The challenges didn't disappear overnight. David still had to save his business. Elena still had to decide about the residency. Maya still had to navigate her father's return. But they were facing these challenges together now, instead of letting them drive them apart. That night, after Maya was asleep, David and Elena talked until sunrise about what they wanted their future to look like. Not the perfect future they'd once imagined, but the real, complicated, beautiful future they could actually build together. Elena took the residency in New Mexico. The decision came after weeks of late-night conversations, pros and cons lists, and Maya's surprising insistence that her mom should go. You always tell me to be brave, Maya had said one evening. This is you being brave. The morning Elena left for Santa Fe, David stood in her empty apartment feeling like half of himself was missing. The walls looked strange without her paintings. The silence felt wrong without her humming while she worked. Maya was staying with her father for the first month of Elena's absence. It was part of the custody arrangement they'd worked out, and Maya was excited about spending time with her dad. But David felt completely alone for the first time in 2 years. The first week was the hardest. David threw himself into saving his business, working 16-hour days and surviving on coffee and determination. He'd found 2 new investors and a smaller project that might keep them afloat. But without Elena to come home to, success felt hollow. Elena called every evening at 8 o'clock their time. She'd tell him about her work, the other artists in the program, the desert landscape that was changing how she thought about color and space. David would update her on his business, on Maya's visits with her father, on the small details of his days that suddenly seemed important because Elena wanted to hear them. I miss you, Elena would say at the end of every call. I miss you too, David would reply, but missing someone, David discovered, wasn't the same as needing them. Over the weeks, he began to remember who he was when he wasn't half of a couple. He started cooking elaborate meals just for himself. He read books Elena wouldn't have been interested in. He took long walks without having to coordinate with anyone else's schedule. It wasn't that he enjoyed being alone, but he realized he could do it without falling apart. Elena was discovering similar things in New Mexico. Her work in the residency was the strongest she'd ever created. Being away from her normal responsibilities, she could focus completely on art for the first time since Maya was born. Her sculptures were getting bigger, bolder. more ambitious. I'm remembering who I am as an artist, she told David during one of their calls. Not just a mom or a girlfriend, but me. The person I was before I became defined by my relationships. David understood. He was remembering who he was too. Not just Elena's boyfriend or Maya's almost stepfather, but David. The person who had dreams and opinions and interests that belonged to him alone. But the separation wasn't just about self-discovery. It was also about testing whether what they'd built together could survive distance and independence. 3 months into the residency, David got news that changed everything. His ex-wife had remarried, and her new husband was being transferred to Seattle for work. She wanted to take Alex with her. It's a great opportunity for all of us, she explained during a tense meeting with lawyers. Alex will have better schools and my husband has family there. You can visit whenever you want. David felt panic rising in his throat. Seattle was 1,000 miles away. Visiting whenever he wanted was meaningless if he couldn't afford the travel or time off work. He'd gone from seeing Alex every other weekend to potentially seeing him a few times a year. That night, David called Elena at their usual time, but he couldn't find the words to explain what was happening. Instead, he just started crying. Elena listened as David told her about Alex, about feeling like everyone important to him was disappearing, about wondering if he was meant to be alone forever. I need you, David said. And it was the most honest thing he'd said in months. I need you here. I can't do this by myself. Elena was quiet for a long time. David could hear desert wind through her phone, a sound that reminded him how far away she was. I'll come home, Elena said finally. No, David said, surprising himself. Don't cut your residency short because I'm having a crisis. That's not fair to either of us. David, you're not a crisis. You're the person I love. If you need me, I come home. That's how this works. David felt something break open in his chest, the way it had that first night when Elena had crossed her room and smiled at him. But this time it wasn't about physical intimacy or emotional vulnerability. It was about Elena choosing him, even when choosing him meant sacrificing something important to her. I love you too, David said, but I want you to finish the residency. I want you to become whoever you're becoming out there. I'll figure out the Alex situation. I'll be okay. Are you sure? David wasn't sure about anything, but he was certain that love meant wanting Elena to grow, even if that growth happened without him. I'm sure, he said. Elena didn't come home early, but something changed in their phone calls after that night. They stopped talking like people who were waiting for their real life to resume. They started talking like people who were living their real life, even though they were living it in different places. Elena's art continued to evolve. She was working on a series about distance and connection, inspired by their separation. David found ways to stay involved in Alex's life even after the move to Seattle. He couldn't see his son as often, but their relationship deepened during longer visits and daily video calls. Maya thrived with the stability of regular time with both her parents and the excitement of having Elena pursuing her dreams. She started creating her own art projects, inspired by the photos Elena sent from her studio. When Elena finally came home after 6 months, David met her at the airport carrying a single sunflower. Elena stepped off the plane looking different. Not just tan from the desert sun, but more confident, more herself. Hi, David said, suddenly feeling nervous. 6 months was a long time. People changed. Maybe what they'd had before wouldn't work with who they were now. Elena walked up to him and stopped. She studied his face like she was memorizing it. Hi, she said back. They stood there in the busy airport, surrounded by people rushing past them, just looking at each other. I have something to tell you, David said finally. Elena raised an eyebrow. I bought a house, David said. Well, I put an offer in. It has a big studio space for you and a yard for Maya, and a guest room for when Alex visits. Elena's eyes widened. You bought a house for us? David realized this was his moment. His chance to be as brave as Elena had been that night she crossed her room to him. His chance to choose vulnerability over safety. I bought it for us, David said, because I want us to be a family. A real family. I want to marry you, Elena. I want to adopt Maya if she'll let me. I want to build something permanent with you. Elena stared at him. For a terrible moment, David wondered if he'd misread everything. If 6 months apart had shown Elena she was better off on her own. Then Elena smiled. The same smile she'd given him that first night. The smile that said she saw him completely and chose him anyway. Yes, Elena said. Yes to all of it. David kissed her right there in the airport while travelers walked around them and announcements echoed overhead. When they broke apart, Elena was crying. I was so scared you'd changed your mind, she said, that you'd realize you were better off without all my complications. Elena, David said, holding her face in his hands. You're not my complication. You're my choice. Every day, you're my choice. They drove home to Elena's apartment, where Maya was waiting with a banner she'd made that said, "Welcome home, Mom." The three of them spent the evening looking at pictures from Elena's residency and talking about the house David had found. Later, after Maya was asleep, Elena and David sat on her couch with tea and talked about everything that had changed while they were apart. I need to tell you something too, Elena said. Being away didn't make me realize I could live without you. It made me realize I didn't want to. There's a difference, David understood. Needing someone because you couldn't function alone wasn't love. Choosing someone because life was better with them, and it was. The house has a workshop in the basement too, David said, for when I want to build something with my hands instead of just drawing it. Elena laughed. Look at us planning our domestic life. Scared? David asked. Elena considered the question seriously. Terrified, but also excited. I've never been part of something this real before. David knew what she meant. This wasn't the fantasy of perfect love they'd both carried from movies and books. This was the reality of two people who'd learned to see each other clearly and decided to build something together anyway. 6 months later, they moved into the house David had bought. Maya helped design her new room and declared the backyard perfect for her dinosaur dig site. Elena transformed the studio space into something that felt like a sacred place for creating. David proposed officially on a Tuesday night while Elena was washing dishes and Maya was doing homework at the kitchen table. Nothing dramatic or planned, just David realizing he couldn't wait another day to make it official. Will you marry me? He asked. No ring in sight, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt with paint stains from helping Elena move her sculptures. Obviously, Elena said, not even turning around from the sink. Maya looked up from her math homework. Does this mean David's really going to be my stepdad? If that's okay with you, David said. Maya grinned. Only if you keep making pancakes. I think I can handle that, David said. Elena turned around, her hands covered in soap bubbles, and smiled at the two people who had become her family. Not the family she'd planned on or the one she'd imagined, but the one she'd chose.